All right, so as you guys could obviously tell from the Konami Twitter, I was a bounty duelist this weekend, which is a pretty cool thing they do, where they pick a couple of people, and when you beat them in the tournament, you get packs. And then they went around and took photos of everybody who was a bounty duelist, and then they posted them on Twitter. And that's where people find out that I ultimately decided to play the Pearly deck. But yeah, I figured we start with a little deck profile, and we talk about the deck that I played. It's not a topping deck. I did not even make day 2, but I still think this deck profile in particular is going to be interesting because there were a couple things about my deck that I was really happy with, and there were a couple things about my deck that I was really unhappy with, and I think there's a lot to take away from the experience. So let me show you the deck, and let me also tell you why I decided to play Pearly and all that good stuff, because I still think there's always a lot of things to take away even when you don't do so well. The reason I played Pearly is because in my personal testing, I didn't think the metagame was as diverse as it was at the YCS. I thought in testing, the freaking Pearly deck and the Unchained deck were still a decent amount above the rest. So for me, a couple days before the YCS, I was basically between Unchained and Pearly. I tried some other decks. I tried Tearlaments. I even tried stuff like Salamangrade. I even gave Vanquish Soul another try. I didn't think any of those decks were powerful enough. The only reason why I picked Pearly over Unchained was the fact that Unchained plays all those one-offs that you don't want to draw, and Pearly doesn't really have that. The list is not completely standard, so I guess we should just quickly go over it before we talk about anything else. There's obviously going to be 3 Pearlies and 3 Pearlily, but then next up you already see where it starts getting a little bit less standard. Because of a Rysart being gone, I decided to play a Pearly version that has a discard package. Every single game you're trying to discard multiple cards, so I figured I really wanted a discard engine, and I really like this. The only thing that you don't have when you play this version is you don't get to play Prosperity, which is of course a card that you would like to have in your deck, but I think it was completely fine without it. Like, I did not have issues with bricking. And the reason why I decided to play discard engines is because it makes you play through hand traps a lot better. Like, you just start playing, and if you get hand trapped on the Lily or you get hand trapped on whatever, having more cards in hand, going plus by summoning these guys, is actually quite important, I think. And so I did not only play the Beast, I also played Squamata and Hedgehog. So I played 6 discards for the Pearly quick play spells. If anything, I feel like I drew these not often enough. I almost wanted more than that. The reason why you play exactly those 3, if you have 1 quick play spell and Squamata, you can send Beast and draw a card immediately. If you have another discard spell, you can search Hedgehog and grab Beast so that both discards go plus. Also, another reason why I chose these is because you can hit them off of the Sylvan Link 1 and they will trigger because the Sylvan Link 1 mills them. And coincidentally, which happened once or twice, you can hit them against Tearlaments when they go Agido or Kelbeck. You can get some value out of it. That was my monster lineup. There's no hand traps in here, and there is no Fenrirs. Fenrir, I think, is a phenomenal card in Pearly. But the reason I did not play Fenrir was I wanted to play these, and that leads to 2 things. The first thing is I want to use my quick play spells in the draw phase very often to play around Drone and Lockbird. The second reason is when you play discard engines like Brow or Shaddoll Beast, you're going to draw cards when you already have monsters on the board, and you don't want to draw into Fenrir with those. That's why I decided to not play Fenrir, and I don't think that was the problem. This, out of anything in my deck, I liked the most. The discard package was great. It let me play into boards super well. It let me play through hand traps super well. I was a big fan of these cards. The Pearly spells we can go over very quickly. The only decision you have to make is how many field spells do you want. I wanted 3. Everything else is at max. I decided to play 3 field spells because I wanted to hard draw this card going second, because it's really good in a lot of matchups to just make your stuff untargetable. It also gives you just a better chance of hitting with the Pearly main deck monster, of course, when you reveal 3 cards. So I decided to play 3 streets and then 1 trap. This is not what's interesting about a Pearly deck. These cards are always going to be the same plus minus some of the field spells. That's literally it. For my non-engine, I decided to not play hand traps in the main deck. Not because I dislike hand traps in this format. I just think hand traps are a little bit weird in Pearly specifically. My problem with hand traps in testing, specifically against decks like Unchained and Tearlament, was that when I go second and I have 1 hand trap, maybe 2, they would usually still play through it, right? Because they all play talents, they play thrust to extend, and both of those decks are actually not that bad against hand traps. I tested Crow, I tested Ash, Imperm, all those cards. If you have 1 or 2 of those cards, there's still a very decent chance they still end on Wave King Caesar. Like, that can still happen. And then you're in trouble because your entire non-engine is hand traps and your entire engine loses to the Caesar, right? So I thought it was the wrong approach to try and stop the Caesar from hitting the board. I thought that was not the best way to go about the deck. So for game one, I decided to go board breakers, but I side deck a lot of hand traps for the matchups where I think hand traps are actually good. So I decided to play Book of Eclipse because it's very good against Pearly, and it also helps a lot against Unchained because you simply book the Caesar, which is the biggest deal against Pearly, and I didn't expect people to go for the Griffin. We played 3 Talents and 3 Trust, and then I played a Change of Heart and an Imperm. So the Change of Heart is here as a secondary target for the Thrust, and then I wanted Imperm as a one-of, because if I go first and I get hand trapped, it doesn't make sense for me to set the leap. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I was very happy with my deck for game one. Out of the 9 game ones I played, I believe I won 7, which is a pretty good rate. Like, I was really happy with that. I think the main deck was honestly pretty strong. The extra deck is relatively standard. There's 2 Noirs, 2 Happiness. I decided to go with 1 Beauty, which I never missed the second copy. I think that was fine. Plump, the Baby Noir. I decided to play the Ensemble Robin, which is, I think, a much better card now than it was in quote-unquote Cash Tira format. Basically, turn 1, when you can already play, you would decide, you know, do I need to make Sylvan Princess Sprite to hit another spell card, or do I try and make an Ensemble Robin to just have a better defensive board? And I made this a couple times, and it was actually quite good. This was the one card in my entire extra deck I did not make the entire weekend. I'm not sure if this is still necessary, the Slacker Magician. Downard, 1 Zeus. There's like no shot you need 2 Zeus in this deck. Honestly, this card didn't even come up that much. You still need it, of course. It's a very important option to have. You never need a second one. And then you played some links. I played a Dark, an Azalea, and an Anima. This is like, it's a pretty standard extra deck. There's nothing crazy going on in the extra deck, I don't think. Side deck, I played 3 Nibs, 3 Drolls, and 3 Ashes. Like I said, I like hand traps this format, but I don't like hand traps game 1 in Pearly. So basically covering for combo decks like Manadium, Rika, Drytron, Dark World, those kind of things, right? That's what I really wanted. I didn't want to go into the tournament with no hand traps anywhere in my deck, right? And so after I decided to not play hand traps in the main deck, I decided I would need to side a significant amount of hand traps. So I sided all of these, and I was pretty happy with those in the matchups that I sided them. And then you play 1 Shaddoll Dragon, which is cool because it gives you multiple ways to out cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance or Skill Drain. And then I played 1 card that I thought was pretty good. It was Spellbound. The reason why Spellbound is in here is because it actually covers a decent amount of matchups going first and second. You can side it against Pearly going second, because when they go for the Pearly Leap, you chain Spellbound and they cannot XYZ on top of the little Pearly XYZ. You side it against Flu, because when they go summon some little birds, you just spellbound and then they can't tribute them. You also sided against Chimera because they set Chimera Fusion on their first turn, and when you spellbound, it stops them from using all of the monsters on their board as fusion material, which means they cannot make Guardian Chimera, they cannot make Magnum the Reliever, because both of those cards require cards on the field as material. The same for Dragostapelia, right? Dragostapelia needs a fusion monster, which you cannot have that in hand. You have to use it from your field. That was pretty good for me against the Chimera people that I played. You can also side it against Branded because it's the same against Branded in red. Going first, you can also side it in like almost any matchup, honestly. It also prevents like random Underworld Goddess and stuff like that. Shoutouts to Nesh for this because he told me about this on the Friday. He was like, you should play Spellbound. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. And I like this card. I think it was good. And then it's just 2 more thrust targets. It's Herald of the Abyss and Harpy's Feather Duster. So that was the deck. And I'm gonna be honest with you, in a vacuum, I think this list was pretty good. I think this list was pretty damn strong. So let's talk about why it didn't work out. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. If I'm happy with my deck list and most of my choices, why the hell did it not work out? If you've been following my tournament report that I gave out on like Twitter and everything, I did not actually lose that much. After 9 rounds of Swiss, I had 5 wins, 1 loss, and 3 freaking draws, which was a surreal experience because I get draws very rarely. I've never had more than 1 draw in my entire life in a tournament. I don't think I've ever had 2 draws even in one tournament. It's never been an issue for me to like go into time that often and then draw that often. That's a preparation issue with the deck. When I chose this deck and I brought it to this YCS, I did not realize how much of a problem the timer is for Pearly. Because if you look at this main deck, right? This main deck, no hand traps with the discard engine, all gas, no breaks. you just make a Noir every single time when you go first. And I made a Noir every single time when I went first. But I didn't have like 3 hand traps to back it up to immediately make my opponent pass turn. Most of my opponents, I would just like build a Noir, it would sit here, and my opponents would start playing into it. And that, against decks like Unchained, Tearlaments, Chimera, or Branded, it just took a long time, right? I would still win those games, but it just took a very long time. And that's not because my opponent played slow or I played slow. It was just a very regular game, but it's just like I made a towers monster and I basically didn't interrupt them for a very long time, right? They were just able to play. Eventually, I win game 1 and then we go to game 2 and there's like, I don't know, 15 minutes left or something. And my opponent would go first. They would make their board and it would take a little bit of time. And then I would play into it and I would try to break it. And that also takes a while, right? Sometimes I was able to break it and those were the matches that I won. Out of the 5 matches that I won, 4 of them were 2-0s, because honestly, I don't know how this deck plays 3 full games in 45 minutes. Like, I have no idea how it does it. And the problem was, normally one thing you would do in that scenario, like if you win a very long game 1, let's say you're behind in game 2, you're like, I'm probably gonna lose this game if it goes on for like 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes, right? Something you can do, which is an important thing to do sometimes if you don't want to draw, you just scoop game 2 and you're like, okay, let's go to game 3 with a proper amount of time left, right? The problem is with Pearly, it's stupid to do that. I have to try and win game 2 because my deck has no way to gain life or anything or inflict damage. There's nothing in here. And it's even worse than that. You pay 500 life points with my friend Pearly, you just lose, right? And so my option is basically, we're in game 2, 10 minutes left or whatever. I can either try to win game 2, even though my opponent has made a very strong board or like, you know, whatever, or I can scoop and go game 3, but then my deck is at a super big disadvantage because what do I do? Game 3, 10 minutes left, I go first, I do my combo, my friend Pearly, I make a Noir with 40 materials, and then my opponent just starts playing into it. And I probably lose in time. It literally doesn't matter. So I just had to try and win game 2. The deck itself is not bad. It's just an issue of the deck is bad under the current time rules, right? This is a huge oversight that I made because I tested this deck not in tournaments. I played this deck against friends. I played on DB. I tested online. I tested with friends IRL, but we never had a timer running, right? And it's just something that I never really realized how long the games were actually taking and how much of an issue I would have if it were to go to time, which is honestly, for how much I've been playing this game, a shocking oversight. Let's be real. This is not an excuse. It's just something to take away that even when you've been playing this game for as long as I have, you still miss very obvious things like that in your preparation for events sometimes. Like to me, it was like shockingly obvious after the day 1 at YCS Dortmund that I was like, yeah, this deck has an obvious issue with the current time rules. This is mandatory. You cannot not use this card on your first turn. Most of the times you have to do it. If it was at least a deck that didn't pay life points, right? If it was at least 8,000 to 8,000, I could be like, okay, let me just scoop game 2 early. Let's go to game 3. I try to make my board. If they can play into it for long enough, then so be it. If they can't, then I can maybe attack for game. And worst case, if they can't do damage and I can't do damage, it's at least still a draw. You know, in this case, it's just like if both of us don't do damage, I lose, which is very bad. It was a huge oversight that I made with Pearly. And that's also why I wasn't very mad when I didn't make day 2, because there was a certain point in the tournament, I think it was after I got my second draw or whatever, I was like, dude, this deck was just not smart, you know? It was not smart of me to bring this exact deck. I don't know if there is a way to prepare for this problem. I don't know if you just have to side Dogwood or something like that. I don't know if that's the solution, but I would never bring this deck again in this iteration to the event. Such an obvious thing to overlook. It's a learning, so that's okay. I still think the deck was good overall. My matchups... yeah, round 1 I beat Burning Abyss, round 2 I beat Chimera Branded, round 3 I beat Unchained, round 4 was my first draw against Branded Despia. This is where I started noticing there was an issue. It was a good game 1, and that's the thing that's the most frustrating. All of those game 1s that I won, or all of the game 1s in general, were very, very fun because this deck is very grindy. It was exactly like my alley of how to play the game. Like, it was very fun. Going first, going second, it's a very fun deck. I really liked it, but it just had that one issue that I didn't account for, which was frustrating. Against Branded, I win a 35-minute game 1 or something like that. They go first in game 2. I ash their Branded Branded Fusion and they simply Cartesia into a Masquerade. Normally, if I have the time, I pretty much always beat that opener, right? I had 5 cards in hand. It's just the Masquerade, no other interruptions. I don't know how many minutes there were left exactly when I started my turn. It was just not possible. I couldn't do it. But I also couldn't just scoop and say, yeah, let's quickly run it into a game 3. Let's do that. That would have been so dumb of me. Because what am I going to do? If I let them go first, there's going to be a Masquerade again, and I lose to that. If I go first, I activate my friend Pearly, pay 500, then they play into it for 3 minutes, and I lose as well. Like, I just had to try and win game 2 somehow against the Masquerade 5 minutes before time or whatever. So I started playing into the Masquerade. I go for a beauty, I take the Masquerade, I attack them, but I'm like down way too many life points at that point, and then I have to pass, and they just go Albion, send Retribution, grab rack, Branded Fusion, play a little bit, and it's a draw, right? So, I win round 5 against Synchro Branded, so at that point I'm 4 wins, 1 draw, so I'm like, okay, maybe it's fine. Round 6 I draw against Tearlaments. This time the other way around. This time I lost a very long game 1. Which was a little frustrating because I made a very big Noir against them turn 1, like 8 materials, I want to say, maybe 7, and they just play into it with Tearlaments. And I'm like, okay, why are you playing into this Noir? Why are you not surrendering? You probably have an out in your extra deck. When they had 4 monsters on the board, I was like, okay, goddammit, I probably have to spin one because they're probably playing Goddess. Or they are trying to deck me out with Agido and Kelbeck, which is also a problem for this deck. This deck, honestly, struggles against Tier. That was the second oversight that I had. I did not realize how much Purely struggles with Tearlaments. So I was afraid of Goddess. Long story short, I have a lot of follow-up because I drew a couple cards, and I can probably just start using my Noir to spin like 3 or 4 cards. Turns out I was wrong because after I started using Noir, I used it on like 4 cards. They were still able to set up a freaking crazy board. Milled a Scream to search Sulliak. Then they milled Heartbeat and Meta Noise to get back Heartbeat. And then they hard drew Crime. So they ended on all 3 trap cards. Scream face up, Winda. Crazy that they were able to do that through like 3 or 4 Noir spins. It was insane. I lost game 1. I won game 2 like 4 minutes before time. So we quickly went to go game 3. Time was called during their main phase 1, so I knew I was not going to get a turn. It was either if they find Scattershot, I lose. If they don't find Scattershot, it's a draw. Luckily for me, they did not find Scattershot. So that was the second draw. Then round 7, I played against Tearlament again, and that one was actually crazy. I lose game 1. Game 2... I go first, probably made a Noir. They could not play through it. On the next turn, I don't kill them, but I have like a Noir with 10 materials or something, and they have 0 cards in hand, 0 cards on the field. They draw for turn, and they normal summon Diviner, and they mill an Agido, and they activate Agido, and they mill a Kelbeck. You might think is whatever, you know, because you have a fat, unaffected Noir. What are they gonna do? The issue was, before they top decked the Diviner, the cards in my deck were exactly 10. Not 9, not 11, it was exactly 10. I decked out. If I had 9 cards in my deck, they would not be able to activate the second mill 5 dude, but I had exactly 10. That was my only loss in the tournament, by the way. And I'm not gonna lie, if that does not happen right there, it's probably another draw because I don't think we finished game 3 in whatever was left. I don't know how long was left at that point, but we probably would not have finished another game. So it probably would have been another draw, which is crazy to think about. At that point, I was 4-1-2, which was basically the bubble after round 7, which is relatively early, so that didn't feel good. I needed to win 5 in a row. Round 8, I was able to beat Chimera. Chimera felt like a pretty decent matchup to me, honestly. And then round 9, I played against Unchained, and it was the exact same scenario. Game 1, the game was super fun, right? Because I had a Noir, I had an Eclipse, I had follow-up. They started playing into it. I used Noir a couple times because I know Unchained plays Goddess, so I have to use the Noir at some point. They have a bunch of extenders. I Book of Eclipse them on 4 monsters. Their end phase, they draw 4 cards. So they also have insane follow-up. On the next turn, I do like this huge combo turn where I make like a Happiness, attack all their shit, clear their entire board, make double Noir this time, both 8 materials, and a Zeus against their like 6 cards in hand. They try to play into my board again. They can't break it, and they lose game 1 after like, once again, 30 minutes or something. Then once again, it was the exact same thing in game 2, where they went first. They made Caesar plus D-Barrier or something like that. And I was able to play into it a little bit, actually, because I had Change of Heart and a way to make Dark. So I played into it a little bit. It was just the same thing. At no point in that match, it made sense for me to just say like, yeah, let's quickly go to game 3. I could have done that when I saw the D barrier, right? I could have said, yeah, I'm just going to scoop, go game 3 as fast as possible. But then I probably lose the match. That's why I don't regret not scooping any of the game 2s, because it just doesn't make sense. Because I know there's like a 95% chance that I'm just going to lose instead of like drawing, right? I can try to go second and OTK them, but most decks have a time win condition, right? If I let Tearlaments go first with 5 minutes left on the clock, they just scattershot me. If I let Unchained go first, they just use the Requiem to gain 1,000. Most decks just have a better win condition in time than this deck does. So like, it just feels awful to play when it gets close to time. It's just, it puts you in a very awful situation. There was no time cards, no options or anything like that in my deck. That's why I had such a hard time at this event, which was honestly, once again, 100% on me, 100% an oversight on my end. No one to blame but me. The Condemned Dark Lord is real. Yeah, I heard that there is options for this deck. I don't know if they would have made a difference. All I know is that I'm not going to make this mistake again, which is, I guess, the good thing from this YCS, right? Even after playing this game for so many years, you can still learn from an experience like that, because I'm just going to make sure next time that my decks don't have this sort of issue, right? Which is important. Right? That's an important thing to take away even when you don't do so well, to find out what the reasons were. Because I don't think it was because I was particularly unlucky or because I played badly. I was pretty happy with both of those things. The deck performed as I expected it, basically. Outside of time, I was like pretty happy with it. It won the games that it was supposed to win. It drew consistently. It also drew consistently. Heck. I was happy with most of my decisions outside of like that one issue that the deck had. That's my YCS Dortmund deck profile. I hope you were able to take something away from that.